This evening, as part of our Real History series, the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center is hosting Black Lives Matter at School, Disrupting White Supremacy by Anthony Dandridge and Kirsten Green. In their presentation, Anthony and Kiersten will reflect on several obstacles and successes over the past 3 years in the growing Suny New Paltz Black Lives Matter at School collective. Then they will tie that collaborative work to the new volume from editors Denisha Jones and Jesse Hagopian, Black Lives Matter at School, an Uprising for Educational Justice. Following that, they will invite participants to consider how schools and communities can work together to disrupt white supremacy, more explicitly in both the short and long term. Kirsten Green is an associate professor for literacy education at Suny New Paltz in the Department of Teaching and Learning, where they teach pre- and in-service teachers how to teach reading, writing, and multimodal text production. Kiersten has been an anti-racist educator and union activist for the past 20 years in both K through 12 and higher education, and is a founding member of the Black Lives Matter at School collective at Suny New Paltz. Their scholarship critically examines the disconnect between policy and practice in 21st century schooling. Anthony Dandridge is a visiting lecturer at Suny New Paltz in the second oldest Black Studies department on the planet. He has taught at Temple University and the University of Delaware, an Afrocentrist that prioritizes the importance of cultural lenses when engaging phenomena. Anthony has been teaching university courses on race and racism for 20 years, worked with incarcerated youth in the Don't Fall Down in the Hood program, and incarcerated adults in the now international Inside Out Prison Exchange program, where college students go into prisons and participate in college courses for a semester with people behind walls. He is a founding member of the Black Lives Matter at School collective at Suny New Paltz. I am pleased to introduce Kirsten Green and Anthony Dandridge.
Ethan, thank you very much for those introductions. And let me adjust my view. Peace family, we're excited to be here today to share some of the story of our efforts at Suny New Paltz related to Black Lives Matter at School. This roadmap here outlines our plans for the next hour today. In our presentation, we aim to situate education as having a primary role in disrupting white supremacy. I would also like to add to the introduction that Ethan actually did so well. My name is Anthony Dandridge and my personal pronouns are he, him, his. My favorite phrase of mine is, I don't need to know you to love you, and I mean it. I'm a visiting instructor at the second oldest Black Studies department on the planet at Suny New Paltz. I started teaching as a graduate student at Temple University, where as an undergraduate in philosophy department, I was told that Africans do not philosophize. After a couple of years of study and bold engagement with my professors, they saw it fit to offer me a position that I was not even interested in at the time. The email started, we are making you an offer that you can't refuse. And in the end, I found myself teaching African and African-American philosophy in the same classroom that my professor told me that it does not exist. Studying the Temple School of Africology and African-American Studies, the first department on the planet to grant a doctoral degree in the field, I am an Afrocentrist. Thus, I center the experiences of people of African descent as active agents or participants in the world, as opposed to relegating them to the margins of white supremacist hegemonic European reality by undermining their agency and subsequently their humanity. Ultimately, in accordance with an Afrocentric paradigm of thought, I view education as inherently political and a tool for social change. My anti-racist work, as teased out by my colleague from Temple University Department of Africology and African American Studies, Ibram Kendi, who wrote the text, How to be an Anti-Racist, compels me to recognize that there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. One either allows racial inequities to preserve as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is not an in-between safe space of not racist. The claim of not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. And I would like to ask that it is also a mask for power. I'm honored to be invited to discuss such important work as that of Black Lives Matter school movement.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten Green, and my pronouns are she or they. I'm an associate professor of literacy education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Suny New Paltz. I started my career as an elementary school teacher in New York City. I've been a union activist and co-conspirator in the struggle to end racism for the last 20 years. I'm a white, non-binary human who sees my role as a teacher educator as inextricably linked to the work of anti-racism, and I acknowledge that I will always have more to learn. While I have lots to say on the topic of Black Lives Matter at school after several years of sustained action, and I'm proud of my involvement in bringing the initiative to Suny New Paltz, I'm also always thinking about the dual risks of performativity and saviorism in this white body. As Dr. Bettina Love writes, anti-racist teaching is not just about acknowledging that racism exists, but consciously committing to the struggle of fighting for racial justice. Consistently showing up for anti-racist work is part of how I can consciously commit to the struggle of fighting for racial justice on our campus community, on our campus today and every day. I also try to be vigilantly aware of my shortcomings and blind spots as a white person. I'm often asked what it means to be a co-conspirator, and I borrow the term from Dr. Bettina Love, who considers the word ally to be more passive and co-conspirator to be more active. She compares being an ally to being a noun and a co-conspirator to being a verb. In short, being a co-conspirator requires knowledge and action. Thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. I'm looking forward to spending this time with you.
And here's our land acknowledgement. I would like to name the land. The Suny New Paltz campus occupies the land of the Muncie Lenape people, and the library at A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center occupies the land of the Muncie Lenape and Mohican peoples. If you are not sure what indigenous lands you currently occupy, please consider using the native land mapping tool to learn about and acknowledge the land that you are on. We will add the link in the chat at the end of our presentation. Naming the land. As all human beings are descendants of those first peoples in Africa to populate this planet over 200,000 years ago, knowledge of this fact helps us all to understand our common ancestors, our common conditions as social beings, and ultimately our common reality. Accordingly, all communities without exception impart owes its being, vivacity, and limitations to the extensive generations of ancestors that have contributed to our individual and communal lived realities. Throughout human history, this has in part been expressed as a series of relationships that have manifested themselves in this very moment. As all things one does and does not do, I would like to say that again, as all things one does and does not do impacts all others at all times. On this land, many were brought against their will. On this land, others came in search of opportunities, and on this land, still others have lived here as managers, cultivators, and cousins of the earth. Facts are not fake news. The truth both hurts and heals, but the well-being of any individual or community is in part rooted in self-reflection, critical thinking, and the establishment of solidarity across ethnicities, races, genders, sexual orientation, class, and even organizations. In many ways, solidarity is mutual respect. It's relational. I want to start by acknowledging what has been buried, by honoring the truth. We are standing on the ancestral land of the Muncie Lenape people. We pay respects to their ancestors, elders, youth, and unborn. Our gathering here today is in part due to the relationships we have to traditions of violence that unjustifiably have taken lives. We are participating in disrupting, displacing, and decentering these marginalizing lived realities of human beings. Your work and our work is also in part due to our efforts at truth-telling, with the intent of making uncomfortable spaces more comfortable and co-creating liberational spaces by the amplification of voices, alignment of purpose, and acknowledgement of difference. Never forget. So what is white supremacy? One of the many things to disrupt white supremacy is by identifying and then developing strategies, tools, policies, and rules that seek to subvert its toxic dominance and maintenance in our daily lives towards a greater sense of equity and well-being, not just for individuals or groups in any exclusive way, but ultimately for the planet as a whole as an interdependent unit. Martin Luther King, in his book, Chaos of Community, Where Do We Go From Here?, stated, the doctrine of white supremacy was embedded in every textbook and preached in practically every pulpit. It became a structural part of the culture, end quote. Ultimately, white supremacy is expressed in a network of ideas, individuals, and institutions that promote the illusion of intellectual, moral, and civilizational hierarchies among human beings. These unjustified hierarchies maintain gaps, disparities, and values that are dehumanizing. And by default, they do not fully appreciate or acknowledge our commonality as a species and or embrace our differences in a way that does not view them as being deficient. White supremacy is a cancer of ignorance. And as King identified it as a structural part of culture, it in part reproduces itself in the educational institutions, as these institutions are socializing institutions, which contribute to the formation of our identities, interests, and future possibilities. Thus, a dominantly white supremacist nation produces dominantly white supremacist educational institutions that reproduce harmful norms, which reflect the misaligned interests of racists. Black Lives Matter at school is an extension of the long traditions of struggle that people of African descent have participated in for thousands of years on the mother continent of Africa, which also extends through their enslavement and their forced landing here in America in 1619. From the institutional resistance of white supremacy by the development of historically Black colleges and universities to the establishment of educational and industrial training school for Negro girls by the master teacher Mary McLeod Bethune, later to become Bethune-Cookman College, who also was the founder of the National Council for Negro Women, to the creation of critically reflective tools for intellectual resistance by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Negro History Week, later to become Black History Month, and is publishing in 1933 of the book named The Miseducation of the Negro, to the creation of the freedom schools as a way of subverting those specific practices that were specifically denied to Black folk, the curricular engagement of the Civil War, civics, and foreign languages, and in some cases, such as that of Virginia, states would shut down the entire school district as a way of resisting desegregation and enforcing white supremacist ideologies and institutions that ultimately benefit white supremacist individuals. As a national movement, Black Lives Matter in school compels individuals and institutions to have genuine discussions around systemic racist policies and practices that have shaped our educational institutions and the future of our communities and nation by molding the minds of our youth. Yes, it takes a village to raise a child, and white supremacist institutions in that village will impact our youth in complex, but many times not so covert ways. Black Lives Matter School participates in disrupting the white supremacist educational and institutional norms in similar ways that the establishment of the first Black Studies Department in 1968 at San Francisco State University and the second Black Studies Department in 1969 at Suny New Paltz have created space for Black folk to be able to contribute to this global marketplace of ideas and concepts, not necessarily or fully on their own terms, but intentionally as a means to engage the low enrollment of Black students, the disparate treatment that these students have once on campus, humanity's understanding of itself, and many other issues that in part undermine white supremacy. The educational traditions of people of African descent are as extensive and diverse as the educational development of humanity as a whole. Yet empirically based, critical assessment of those traditions, such as that established by Asa Hilliard in his text, The Reawakening of the African Mind, states that the purpose of education was not to speed through a 4-year program to get a job and get paid, but rather to become a better person and to learn how to live in harmony with nature. As that is a particularly fundamental objective with broad implications, all educational traditions and movements participate in the creation and maintenance of objectives, which are maximally reflective of their ideological purpose. Where white supremacist ideas lead to white supremacist educational institutions, the Black Lives Matter school movement in part established its purpose when 4 demands were created. End zero tolerance discipline, in part due to its racially disparate outcomes, and replace it with restorative justice, where models of embracing differences, community participation, and community accountable are engaged. Implement Black studies and ethnic studies, where educational content is understood as being more inclusive, equitable, and nourishing. Fund counselors, not cops. Remove law enforcement and punitive methods from educational spaces and replace them with counselors that engage the full complexity of students' needs. And hire more Black teachers. understand that they can be a model of excellence for students, and the mutual recognition of identity and interests can foster successes and understanding by all parties. Eventually, there were 13 principles that were created as valuable objectives for the movement. The 13 principles were initially developed by Black Lives Matter Global Network and were mapped onto the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action by educators in Philadelphia. From the book in the text, Jesse Hagopian mentioned, it should be noted that Black Lives Matter School is not formally affiliated with the Black Lives Matter School Global Network or any other organization in the movement for Black lives, who have done so much important work toward ending police violence. But the educators who built Black Lives Matter School have relied on the momentum of those organizations and know that there can be no real education if students are not allowed to discuss police violence and other issues that matter most to them. These 13 principles are rooted in the amplification of the better interests of the Black community.
The Black Lives Matter at School movement began in the fall of 2016 in Seattle at John Muir Elementary School, when teachers organized to take a stand in solidarity with the movement for Black lives and wear shirts to school that said Black Lives Matter at School. As news of the action spread, the school was met by a bomb threat. But instead of deterring the faculty from gathering, the bomb threat had the opposite effect. And some 3,000 teachers across the city of Seattle showed up to work wearing Black Lives Matter at School t-shirts. From there, teachers in Rochester, New York planned a similar day of action, and educators in the Caucus of Working Educators in Philadelphia led the implementation of the first Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action and worked to break down the 13 principles across that first week of February in 2017. They also developed a curriculum which is now available for free on the national website. Weeks of Action took off from there across the country in 2018 and 2019. And in the 2020-21 school year, the National Steering Committee launched the Black Lives Matter at School Year of Purpose. The following video speaks to what the movement hopes to expose, create, and achieve.
What is happening in our schools today is heartbreaking.
This is one of the racist rants discovered Monday.
Can you hear it okay?
At Oak Park River Forest High School.
Our kids are being called the N-word. We have white students who think it's okay to come to school for Halloween with a KKK mask.
1.6 million children in this country go to a school where there's a police officer but no counselor.
Educators in Washington State are 90% white.
I'm not getting the education that I need as a Black male.
The people who have done the conquering have been the ones that we've been lauding in school.
Kobe, who's in the 9th grade at Pearland High School, was studying immigration when he read this in his textbook, a comment that referenced African slaves as workers.
All I ever see is us being slaves, you know? Like, why don't you ever teach me, you know, how we fought back? Because I know my people are strong.
A referee at a high school wrestling match in New Jersey told a wrestler he had to cut his dreadlocks or forfeit the match.
I see people around me who are hurt, and it is wrong to not speak up.
Black Lives Matter at School is a declaration that Black students deserve to be taught the truth and that their lives have value.
It gives students, not only of color, but of other races and ethnicities, a chance to see different cultures.
We have lessons for every single day, Monday through Friday. So there's about 2 to 3 principles per day that are connected.
We participated in this last year, and a lot of feedback we got from educators who have never really experienced ethnic studies in the classroom was that their students were more engaged in this content than they had ever seen before.
I learned so much through that really empowered me as a Black male. This is probably the first time I really was excited about school. You know, it's something that I'm passionate about now.
Having been following the National Black Lives Matter at School initiative from its inception, I noticed the lack of involvement from colleges of education. It made some sense in some ways, since the movement was initiated by K-12 educators, but teacher prep programs housed inside colleges of education are a literal bridge between institutions of higher ed and the K-12 sector. So when I realized that the 2018 National Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action coincided with a SUNY New Paltz School of Education faculty meeting, I helped organize a few faculty members to wear Black Lives Matter at School shirts on that day. The following fall, I co-founded the SUNY New Paltz Critical Pedagogy Study Group with Dr. Michael Smith, who's now at the College of New Jersey, and we met regularly to read, write, and think together about the application of critical pedagogy in our daily work. Although CritPed started in the School of Education, it quickly spread across campus and became the beginning of a fast friendship and activist partnership between me and Anthony. The Critical Pedagogy Study Group planned 3 events that year that aligned with the national 2019 Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action: a close reading and discussion of James Baldwin's essay, A Talk to Teachers, a panel discussion on anti-racism in the classroom, and a documentary film screening about charter schools. We had limited attendance at those events, though the discussions were fruitful. The following year, we made a strategic decision to reach out to the Faculty Development Center to see if partnering with our official space for professional learning on campus would have a different impact than our previous ad hoc approach. We were able to engage more than 850 people in our campus community across 13 planned events. However, we were challenged by, and continue to be challenged by, the possibility of having our truly grassroots efforts subsumed by the larger institutional structures that exist. We planned 2 weeks of action this year too, and had about 650 participants across 11 events. Anthony will say more about that in a little bit. The planning process across several years was not smooth sailing. It was messy and fraught, and we made plenty of mistakes in the process. But we also learned valuable lessons. One important lesson that we learned and are still figuring out is that centering Black voices at a predominantly white institution situated in a predominantly white community is no easy task. Most Black faculty and staff are completely tapped out. They're asked to serve on more committees than anyone else and offer hours of invisible labor mentoring students of color. Another lesson that we learned is that simply asking, rather than asking for permission, works sometimes. For instance, we had this vision that we'd fill the stairwell of one of our buildings with students, staff, and faculty wearing Black Lives Matter at School t-shirts. But buying t-shirts is expensive, and we didn't want to make people purchase shirts if we could avoid it. So we approached the Department of Student Affairs and the New York State United Teachers, and together they funded the production of over 1,500 shirts that were given away at events across our campus. Another lesson that we learned is that collective leadership is hard, but worth it. We navigated a number of ideas and ultimately felt that spreading our events across 2 weeks instead of 1 was really necessary. What emerged from the 2020 and 2021 weeks of action was a core group of organizers willing to dedicate their energy and resources to move the needle at our institution in support of Black lives. Anthony will now share a little bit more about the details of some of those events. We can't hear you. Oops.
The 2020 Weeks of Action was a watershed event for us. We had groups of faculty members, students, alumni, community members, and even administration coming together for the first time underneath the umbrella of the Black Lives Matter School Collective to engage issues of race and racism on campus. It was amazing that we were able to coordinate all of these individuals and groups. The series of events started with me, a faculty member in Black Studies Department, facilitating a panel named Black Struggle for Justice at SUNY New Paltz, Past, Present, and Future. We had former faculty members from the Department of Black Studies and students from the 1960s on stage with current faculty members in the department and students, including members of the Black Student Union. They were building bridges as the elders spoke about the struggles, survival tools, and our youth engaged them about similarities and differences on campus, where in the end, the similarities of the struggles dominated conversations. We also had a film screening and discussion of the award-winning documentary 13th. There was a panel discussion on the intersection of the Black and Latinx struggles. There was also a presentation that contrasted environmentalism and environmental justice and much more. In the end, there was a final event called In Here, Out There that was facilitated by myself and 2 colleagues, Terry Murray and Chris Whitaker. And we facilitated a faculty and staff contemplative group that meets bi-weekly on campus. In this event designed for Black Lives Matter at School, we engaged issues of contemplative practices as tools for healing and deeper appreciation that included complexities of silence. Martin Luther King said, in the end, you will not remember the words of your enemies, but the silence of your friends. That leads to revealing our connections towards a better sense of empathy.
Crucial to the visibility of and connection to the educational foundation of our everyday work at Suny New Paltz during the 2020 Weeks of Action was the involvement of the Sojourner Truth Library, our campus library, and especially Jennifer Rutner, who curated and developed a publicly available research guide built on the resources gathered by the Critical Pedagogy Study Group. The lobby to our library also housed a beautiful and moving exhibit that featured student artwork related to the movement for Black lives.
The murder of George Floyd. The murder of George Floyd. In terms of the role of a significantly racist police state, is not unlike the murder of Rashard Brooks. It's not unlike the murder of Daniel Prude. It's not unlike the murder of Breonna Taylor, Atiana Jefferson, Aurora Rosser, Stephon Clark, Botham Jean, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Michael Cusseau, Freddie Gray, Tanisha Fonville, Eric Garner, Akai Gurley, Gabriela Navarez, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Tanisha Anderson, Walter Scott, Dante Wright, Adam Toledo, or so many other, including the SUNY Dutchess student 2 days before the murder of George Floyd. His name is Maurice Gordon, and he was unarmed and killed by a New Jersey State Police trooper on May 23rd, 2020. We are living in a significantly large shadow of the murder of George Floyd. As we currently sit here, there's a trial being held to establish the justification or unjustification of the stolen life of George Floyd. A coalescing of events happened to justify and amplify the laws of his life, where so many others' lost lives are erased due to a lack of not just public outrage, but a lack of global outrage. The pandemic and what I would like to describe as a quieting of the planet, where for better or worse, families were forced to see one another because of the changing of the schedules due to somewhat healthy fear of COVID. This disruption of our daily lives compelled many to watch the tragic erasure of a man's life. The disruption of our daily lives opened up spaces for activism when otherwise many people may have had to work. This disruption of our daily lives allowed the planet to breathe, and that nitrogen dioxide levels dipped by 20% globally, 60% in Milan and 45% in New York. This disruption in our daily lives compelled us to heal, seek justice, and expand equity. Kiersten and I were just asked by administration about a week ago if we had anything planned for the end of the George Floyd trial. It's a great idea as we're reflecting on it and realizing that we have a full plate of activity and other issues to do, right? This was more work, right? But literally 4 hours ago, I was contacted by a colleague looking into doing an event, and I'm seriously, at this point, considering doing an event situated around this George Floyd trial. As a wise man by the name of Dr. Malefi Asante once told me that if you see a problem, you've created a job for yourself. Black Lives Matter was everywhere, a global phenomenon that not only had its name written in many streets of this nation, but is being chanted and displayed in London, France, Canada, Ghana, and many other spaces, ultimately leading to the announcement in February that Black Lives Matter was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Wow. And still there's work to be done. In the summer of 2020, Black Lives Matter School held an event on the intersections of racism and the pandemic, of which I participated in. The activism of this summer also galvanized SUNY New Paltz alumni to serve the administration with a list of demands where over 1,200 people signed to support it. Another summer event was that the STEM faculty in Black Lives Matter School organized programs and discussions with STEM students and faculty. There were also multiple campus town halls being held by campus administration. And as a result of the engagement and suggestion of Kiersten and myself at one of these events, the campus released a statement of commitment to become an anti-racist institution. Also that summer, the formation of an organization of which I am co-chair, named the SUNY Black Faculty and Staff Collective, had commenced. The SUNY Black faculty and staff was galvanized by the efforts of Professor Jordan Bell and Professor Willie Morris of SUNY Dutchess, in part to bring awareness to the death of Maurice Gordon and the inadequate attention to his death by SUNY. Currently, the family has filed a $50 million lawsuit against the New Jersey police. The mission statement of SUNY Black Faculty and Staff states, we, the SUNY Black Faculty and Staff Collective, have formed to support Black students, faculty, and staff on SUNY campuses and beyond. Moreover, we are committed to transforming SUNY into an anti-racist structure. The SUNY Black Faculty and Staff Collective seeks to make meaningful institutional changes by advocating for, aiding in the implementation of, and coordinating such activities that support Black students, staff, and faculty across SUNY's campuses. The collective stands independent from, but in support of, offices of diversity and inclusion as a faculty, staff, and student-led effort for concrete change for racial justice in SUNY. We have 11 advocacy points stated on our website, and we have had meaningful and productive conversations with the outgoing chancellor and now president of Ohio State, Christina Johnson, in addition to our newly elected chancellor, Jim Molichis. In February of this year, we held an inaugural SUNY Black Solidarity Conference, and the theme was Good and Necessary Trouble, in honor of the late Congressman John Lewis.
As we approach this past fall semester, we were determined to align a series of campus events with the National Black Lives Matter at School Year of Purpose, which mapped the 13 principles across the academic school year. But like so many others, we also suffered from Zoom fatigue and the uptick in labor from having to move coursework fully online for almost an entire year. Several collective members broke off to join other anti-racist initiatives on campus or stopped attending meetings altogether, disillusioned by the slow pace of change and what felt like empty promises from administration. However, we pulled off a full 2 weeks of programming in February 2021 that included film screenings, panel discussions, community conversations, lectures, and a book reading. Although we felt the loss of not being able to gather together in the same room because of necessary physical distancing restrictions, the series of events created much needed spaces for doing some of the intellectual labor of actively centering Black voices. We're currently planning for summer programming and intend in the 2021-22 school year to finally plan our year of purpose. We held a general interest meeting last week and are looking forward to building plans for the summer and next year.
In early 2020, we found out that Black Lives Matter school effort at SUNY New Paltz was the largest involvement of any institution of higher education that had pledged its commitment to the movement. And we then had the privilege of being invited for an interview to be included in the book, Black Lives Matter at School, an uprising for educational justice, edited by Jesse Hagopian and Denisha Jones. We were interviewed in February of 2020, just as our weeks of action were kicking off, and about 3 weeks before the global shutdown due to COVID-19. In the chapter, we share our plans and lessons learned from 2019. And if we could do the same thing now, we would have so much more to say. Our events in 2020, Weeks of Action, moved the conversation forward on our campus, and the sustained uprising for Black lives in summer of 2020 created a shift in the dialogue at the national level. Having had the chance to examine their curriculum and pedagogy just as much as K-12 schools do.
The book is organized into 4 main sections. The first section, The Start of the Movement, explains in detail how Black Lives Matter at School evolved from an action at an elementary school in Seattle to a national movement in over 40 cities around the country. The second section, Securing Union Support, Successes and Struggles, illustrates the crucial involvement of teachers' unions in fighting to put Black Lives Matter front and center. The third section, Educators Doing the Work, shares stories from classrooms of how teachers developed and shared curricula, demanded the inclusion of Black Lives Matter initiatives in their districts, and showed up for each other and their students. And in the final section, Voices of Students, we hear from students about the importance and impact of Black Lives Matter at School in their lives. The Black Lives Matter at School movement is the story of resistance to racist curriculums, educational practices, and policies. This is the story of educators, students, parents, and community members defying the threats of white supremacists, and the story of an uprising to uproot the racist policies and curriculum that are bound up in the American system of schooling. In short, this is the story of bold action against anti-Blackness in elementary schools, junior highs, and high schools around the country. And we, of course, would add institutions of higher ed to that list.
SUNY. So how is SUNY complicit in reproducing white supremacy? In the last portion of our presentation, we'd like to talk more about how SUNY system itself, and by extension, the communities in which our campus is situated, are complicit in upholding white supremacy, and what are some of the things we can do about it. There are numerous ways that SUNY upholds white supremacy, and the most primary way is being an institution of education in a racial, capitalistic society that puts profits before people. To be clear, we aren't arguing that SUNY is inherently racist. However, we are arguing that by virtue of existing in a society that has a vice grip on whiteness, it is reproducing it by default, unless it is vigilantly examining and questioning its positionality and how it wields its power at all times.
Beyond its sheer existence as an institution of higher ed, SUNY's complicity in reproducing whiteness shows up in its diversity work. Again, not all diversity initiatives are inherently bad or unproductive, but many of them are arguably about making the system look less racist rather than actually undoing racism.
We've seen this very phenomenon unfold numerous times on our campus. For instance, when Black students, alumni, staff, and faculty have raised not feeling seen or heard, or expressed frustration at being tokenized or isolated, the administration's response has largely been to point out how many faculty of color were hired in the previous round of searches. Or when we discovered a Blue Lives Matter sticker on the University Police Department door. We discovered a Blue Lives Matter sticker on a University Police Department door. We were able to get it removed, but the conversation happened in a closed door setting. And instead of turning the incident into a learning opportunity, it was quietly moved on from as soon as the sticker came down. When our campus administration proposed an initiative called the First Amendment Support Team, or FAST, a group of people comprised of plainclothes University Police Department officers and appointed faculty and staff who would be deployed to surveil and potentially interrupt protest activity, our collective wrote a statement in opposition, which quickly gained over 150 signatures of support and led to the indefinite postponement of FAST.
SUNY's record on retention of Black faculty is abysmal, and numbers of recently hired Black faculty are meaningless if the qualitative experience of Black faculty members prevents them from staying at SUNY. According to a 2017 report on gender and racial equity throughout the SUNY system, only 19 Black faculty members reached tenure in the 20 years spanning the 1995-96 and 2015-2016 school years. That is less than one faculty member per campus, and on average, less than one per year.
We point to these examples not to shame our campus or the SUNY system itself. Indeed, our workplaces are our collective homes away from home. On the contrary, we aim to shine a light on the way SUNY embodies what Sarah Ahmed captures in her scholarship on the slipperiness of diversity work in institutions of higher education. Ahmed writes, quote, "Diversity work becomes about generating the right image and correcting the wrong. Diversity becomes about changing perceptions of whiteness rather than changing the whiteness of organizations. Changing perceptions of whiteness can be how an institution can reproduce whiteness as that which exists, but is no longer perceived," end quote.
This photo is a fraught example of what we're talking about. While the photograph represents an undeniable groundswell in discussion at the intersection of anti-Black racism and education on our campus, it has also been reposted and repurposed as semi-false evidence of our campus's anti-racist efforts. In other words, this photograph and what it represents may help change the perception of whiteness at SUNY New Paltz, but it does not change the whiteness of our campus on the whole. While we stand by the efforts of the Black Lives Matter at School Collective and those of colleagues across campus that are working to undo racism, we are also undeniably wrestling with how one institutionalizes anti-racism, or even if it can happen, when the institution itself was built to defend white supremacy.
So what can we do to disrupt the white supremacy that surrounds us every day? The lessons of Black Lives Matter at school are many, and institutions of higher education have a lot to learn from what students, teachers, parents, and community members did and are still doing in the K-12 sector that have taken on this work. Education is clearly key. We need not only hire more Black faculty, but we need to make SUNY a place where Black faculty feel welcome, protected, and connected.
We also need to reckon with the curriculum in order to examine the ways in which Black voices and scholars are silenced, marginalized, or erased through the content of what we teach. We need to mandate Black studies. We also need to examine our pedagogy. Implicit bias or unintended racism in the classroom can be incredibly harmful, and it happens every single day on every single campus, and it often goes on uninterrupted.
Engaging in community readings and viewings and other activities that promote not only thinking, but action are important, as are forming cross-program, cross-department, and cross-school partnerships. So much of this work is about building relationships and cutting against the isolation of divisiveness engendered by academic institutions, policies, and practices. We need to disarm the university police and rethink the purpose of policing on campuses in the first place. And we've been having this argument for over 60 years in the university.
Funding is key. After submitting a request to the central administration for funding to support the Black Lives Matter at School collective on our campus, we received $15,000 in funds spread across 3 years. It's certainly a start, and every campus should provide the same and more.
Connect with your local union chapters. Unions, the Suny Black Faculty and Staff Collective, grassroots organizations like the Concerned Parents of New Paltz, of which Dr. A.J. Williams-Myers was a member, and the surrounding community school districts. Without connecting efforts across space and time, we may continue spinning our wheels.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to get much, much better at acknowledging that institutions of education are by their very existence tools of white supremacy. We need to recognize schools as both tools of oppression and liberation.
Black students, alumni, staff, and faculty have been saying that Suny causes harm to Black people for years. Numerous clear demands have been published by Black alumni, as well as Suny Black Faculty and Staff Collective. Faculty at the Suny New Paltz School of Education have signed a statement on anti-oppressive education. The Suny New Paltz campus released a statement on its commitment to anti-racism last summer. In fact, it was due to our explicit collective organizing and pushing in public forums where we repeatedly pressed administration about whether or not the college would be taking a stance on anti-racism that ultimately led to this statement. It's time that the institution and community not only listen, but respond in a way that doesn't simply reproduce whiteness.
There are no magic formulas for how to most effectively disrupt white supremacy in our local communities, but we have plenty of history and examples to learn from. In the last few minutes of our presentation, we'd like to share some words directly from the authors of the text, Black Lives Matter at School, an Uprising for Educational Justice.
From Jesse Hagopian in chapter 1 on page 5. Today, Black Lives Matter has become the rallying cry of a new generation who, again, have had to unlearn the deceptions drilled into them in school about the fundamental freedom of our nation. The word freedom rings hollow when we reflect on the fact that the United States is the world's biggest jailer. According to the Equal Justice Initiative in 1972, there were only 200,000 people incarcerated in the United States. Today, the number of people in prison or jail has exploded to 2.2 million. So that even though this nation contains only 5% of the world's population, it accounts for nearly 25% of its incarcerated population.
From Brian Jones in chapter 2 on page 30. In the first large-scale attack on Black teachers in the 21st century, occurred after the famous Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. Ironically, this great victory for Black educators and activists was experienced as a calamity for many Black communities. Black teachers and administrators prepared for desegregation by drawing up plans for the best way to approach the transition. All over the United States, Black educators worked out careful plans to have some Black administrators and teachers change schools along with Black students so that the educators could help their white colleagues get to know the new students. Tragically, white politicians and school leaders did not think that desegregation should mean shared power with Black educators or parents. Rather, they drew up desegregation plans that almost always required Black students to travel to previously all white schools and never the reverse. White administrators were reluctant to hire Black teachers, and so one of the perverse results of the Brown decision was mass closure of previously all Black schools and mass unemployment for Black educators.
And I would just like to add 50 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, there was a review by many Black scholars, and one of the dominant tendencies was that desegregation on the whole was not in our better interest in the way in which it was carried out. That being said, from Tamara Anderson, in chapter 3 on page 49, it is vital that we continue to transform our words into powerful actions. In the words of James Baldwin, any real change implies the breakup of the world as one has always known it, the loss of all that gave one identity, the end of safety. Only when we embrace risk can the system be rebuilt, rather than simply being reformed to repeat the errors of the past.
From Awo Kaikor R.E. Price in chapter 5 on page 71. As educators and organizers engage in this critical anti-racist work, it is imperative that we band together in community and foster relationships to strengthen and sustain our work. As we move forward, we must be unapologetic, disciplined, and committed to centering Black, queer, and trans women in order to actualize the world we want to see.
For Myri in chapter 8 on page 105, as educators and social justice warriors, it's a war in many ways. As educators and social justice warriors, we constantly remind ourselves that our working conditions are our students' learning conditions. Union support is crucial for the BLM at School movement. Look around the country at all the unions who support the struggles of BIPOC and the intersectionality of education, poverty, homelessness, school closings, criminalization of our youth, and lack of funding for schools. And remarkably, they are directing the political winds in the country with a progressive agenda.
From Rosie Fraskella, B. Kaiser, Brian Ford, and Jeff Stone in chapter 18 on page 191. To do justice to the Black Lives Matter at School week of action, it cannot last just a week. The foundation and wisdom must live in our curriculum, our professional development, and our student groups. Simply put, to be anti-racist at school means to actively and continually interrogate our curriculum, pedagogical practices, and our social engagement. We must create sustained spaces where educators, staff, and administrators can have conversations about the ways anti-Black racism shows up in our school community and policies. Listening is key. We recognize that BIPOC, whether students, educators, or parents and community members, are the experts on the experience of white supremacy in contemporary society. This means that their voices should be at the center of the conversation.
And last but not least, from Israel Presley, a student at Garfield High School in Seattle, in chapter 26 on page 252 to 254. It's scary for me that there are educators who are afraid that kids of color are actually going to learn about their own cultures and think for themselves. When you hear teachers say, well, how do you think white students are going to feel? That really shakes me up. I want to say, okay, how do you think Black students have felt this whole time? And Asian students, Latinx students, or how about Native students sitting there listening to how Christopher Columbus was such a great guy? He exchanged gifts with the Native Americans and then they gave him his land. Nope. Christopher Columbus came down, killed the people, stole their land, and literally committed a mass genocide. Americans still celebrate him. What a guy. He's swell. But that's the thing. I remember one of the key points that I learned in the ethnic studies class that was, in the ethnic studies class was critical consciousness. We don't have to accept master narratives about history anymore. Black Lives Matter School has shown us that our community can organize and fight and come together to celebrate ourselves and our accomplishments. We're no longer living in a history of defeat. We're living in a future of success.
Thank you for the opportunity to share space and time with you today. A special thanks goes to Troy Ellen Dixon, Ethan Scott Barnett, and everyone else involved at the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center in making tonight happen. We also want to be sure to give a shout out to Anthony Reed, the SUNY New Paltz student who designed the Black Lives Matter at School logo for our campus.
Lastly, we'd like to share this poignant Google ad as Dr. Bettina Love did in a recent talk at SUNY Cortland, not as an endorsement of Google, but as a reminder that Black history is everywhere around us and in the air that we breathe, but it gets erased by everyday practices of schooling. It's about time that it shows up in classrooms, front and center.
I'm telling you already.
But just like life. All right.
Air Jordan ready to take off.
Can I get an amen? And welcome to the very first National Oprah Winfrey Show!
Thank you. We now look forward to hearing from you during the time that we have left.
Wow, that was incredible, y'all. Thank you for that brilliant and enlightening presentation. Not only did you provide the information, but you gave us a lot to think about in our educational institutions, about what we can do locally, and reminded us that, you know, the importance of Black education and Black beauty and Black joy. So I know I can't be the only one that's this excited. Before we start the Q&A, I just would like to invite all of you to join the African Roots Center Book Club led by Odell Winfield, who is in the chat currently. We will be reading Black Lives Matter at School, an uprising for educational justice later this spring. So for more information, reach out to Odell, and I'll drop his email again in the chat. Do we have questions coming in? What's going on? Oh, thank you. Kiersten just put all of the land acknowledgements, book club, websites, all of the sources that have been recognized throughout the evening into the chat. So there was a question by Troy Ellen further back that said, this is in terms to the Black Lives Matter at School Week. Please provide more information about the planned year of purpose. Will this be open to the public?
Kirsten, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Our website is linked in the, it's the third to last one, the BLMS Collective website at SUNY New Paltz. All of our events will be linked there, and everything is open to the public.
And also to put it out there, if anybody in the audience would like to partner with us and do some events, feel free to reach out. All right, we are very much open to building these bridges across from the college to the community in a variety of different ways. In our last weeks of action that was just done in this past February, I think that I actually mentioned it in the presentation, did some presentations with the concerned parents of New Paltz, members of our, actually may be in attendance, but if not, some of those individuals that were actually participated on that panel are Evelyn Clark, G. Modeli Clark, Maureen Crocker, Deborah Fialco, Tanya Marquette, Edgar Rodriguez, and also I believe I mentioned a former member, or let's say current member, I'm not sure of his status, but he was honorably mentioned, Dr. A.J. Williams Myers, right? So not only that, but then other things such as we had an event that had the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, where we had Peter Heyman and Tracy Givens Hunter attend, and we had an event centered around those issues and the work that they do with respect to the Undoing Racism workshop. So just wanted to put it out there. Our email's all available, just contact us, and hopefully we can help to build bridges that would help us to build a better community and a better world.
Awesome, thank you for that. Again, the email is in the chat. That is blmscollective@newpaltz.edu for anyone who's watching later after this has been posted. Do we have any questions? I have a question, I guess, for both of you, but more so Anthony, from your work previously in prisons and youth detention centers. Have you been able to connect with anyone on the other side of the wall that's been able to read this book or use this book?
Right. So as my work with, and particularly was centered around this program called the Inside Out program, in which I was a founding member of. And the program is now being taught at dozens of universities throughout not only the nation, but also throughout the globe now. But in my transition from Temple University to New Paltz, I have not been engaging in that work in the way that I would like to, just because it's a lot of things to get done, right? And you can't, you spread yourself thin. And I found myself actually this semester, in 20 years of teaching in higher education, has been the busiest semester for me in my entire career, and there are a lot of different social changes going on that also contribute to that, right? And as a mentor of mine, Dr. Malefi Asante said, and I quoted him in the presentation, he said, Anthony, listen, when you see a problem, you've created a job for yourself, right? But in understanding that that is the reality of the situation, we also do need to be mindful of spreading yourself too thin. And self-care is important. And that was something that was really talked about at the Suny New Paltz struggle panel, where we had the past, present, and future was engaged by past members and also current students. They talked about the significance and the value of self-care, because a lot of times you can run yourself ragged, and if you are not healthy, then you really can't help anybody else. So that's particularly important, and people need to be mindful of that. And don't beat yourself up about saying no sometimes. I think that that's an important thing that I learned from that. I still have not integrated it into my daily life in the way that I need to be, right? But I'm learning a little bit more. I'm not fond of that. I just wish that I could do more, but at the same time, trying to keep myself healthy.
Traylon asked, is there additional funding being sought to support anti-racist curriculum and programs at Suny New Paltz?
At the moment, not that we're aware of on the campus whole level. There are pockets of faculty members working together. I know there's a group in the School of Science and Engineering right now working on a grant related to curriculum. And we're always actively looking for funding to apply to, but at the very moment, the collective is not working on a grant proposal, but we would like more money. We asked for, I think, $30,000 from the administration, and we were excited to hear that we did get some funding. But if you have 10 events at minimum, and you're trying to bring in keynote folks from outside, $5,000 doesn't go that far for a year. So we definitely need more.
And I would also like to add that since I am a co-chair of the Suny Black Faculty and Staff Collective, which I mentioned, that actually came out of last year's uprising in a variety of different ways. And the murder of Black folk by members of this police state. We've established our organization as a nonprofit, 501(c), and we are actually currently putting together grants in search of funds going forward. So we were able to put on a conference, and the inaugural Black Solidarity Conference this past February. We're looking forward to not only doing that conference again next year, but we also have other conferences lined up, and are even looking towards doing some edited journal work going forward that is actually managed by the collective itself, in addition to other things. But yes, grant writing is something that the collective, Suny Black Faculty and Staff Collective, we are actually participating in right now.
And it would be really great to see some sustained funding for faculty learning. There's a lot of discussion about what faculty are not teaching, but not a lot of discussion about how some of us who need to move will gain some new knowledge, and where will that professional learning be supported from? There's also a question in the chat about unions. We're both members of the Suny United University Professions, the UUP. I'm a former member of UFT, the PSC Adjunct Union. I feel like I'm missing one, but we also try to connect to the local K-12 unions. We've been in touch with the New Paltz United Teachers, but are certainly open and would love to be in touch with other locals.
And you hear how Kiersten says she feels like she's missing one, right? Kiersten is the union activist. All right? I just want to put it out there, right? She goes strong. I am a member of UUP, and have participated in a variety of events. I think that I probably did about 4 or 5 events in concert with UUP over the past 8 to 10 months, right? And but also engaging issues of racism, and they are particularly significant with respect to just even looking at union membership. It's hard for us to tell how many Black folk are union members when they don't even record issues of race, right? And that can be particularly problematic. So hopefully, it looks like we're making some movement with respect to that as we start to move forward. But yeah, working with unions and the Suny Black Faculty and Staff Collective is now in conversation with UUP about seeking some kind of funding as we move forward as well. Yeah.
And we did lean on the New York State United Teachers last year for funding for our t-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Craig asks, a sculpture of Sojourner Truth with her baby is planned for the fall semester on campus. Sojourner spoke truth to power. Can this new edition and a focus on the life and accomplishments of Sojourner Truth help to further Black lives in school?
Well, a way in which I would like to enter this conversation is to say, well, yes, it can in a variety of different ways, in terms of the different ways we understand symbolism is important, and how symbolism can have particularly substantive and a meaningful impact on individuals' identity, interest, and just motivation. That being said, this particular statue is something that we will be engaging at our next meeting. It was brought up by a member of ours. I had heard about it about a week or so ago. I was invited to some dialogue around the issue. There was too much stuff going on. I was unable to attend, but a member of ours brought up the fact, and actually a student member of ours brought up the fact that this student was particularly hesitant about the fact that this Sojourner Truth sculpture is being sculpted by a white woman, right? An issue, and I'm not saying I'm principally for or against it, but it's an issue, and we are seeking to engage that in our next meeting in Black Lives Matter in school. Well, how does the collective feel about that? How do students feel about those issues? And this is not a new phenomenon, right? Because even when we look at Washington, D.C., and we see the Martin Luther King statue, right? That Martin Luther King statue was not designed or sculpted by a Black man, was it? Right? So, so you have those issues. I like the statue, right. But I mean, it may have been a bit more meaningful for those who are aware if it was actually sculpted by a Black person.
And then Craig has also shared a link, but I don't have time to look at it. But for folks listening, it's newpaltz.edu, soaring higher / Sojourner Truth. I guess I have a question, and since I have the privileges, I'm gonna keep asking questions. But I was listening to a Kwame Ture speech, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, this morning. And in one of his speeches, when he's talking about liberation and revolution, he says, it is the educator's responsibility to light the spark for the masses. And it definitely feels like this project and this longer struggle is something that you two are regularly contributing to. But I wonder if you know of any situations locally or nationally in which you're familiar with when like students take this book outside the classroom and into the larger world.
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any at the very moment. Do you mean beyond the school walls, beyond that sort of? Yeah. I think in many ways, the story of this book is exactly that, is sparking a connection between school buildings and the communities that surround them. And so I don't know of any specific incidents or events that have been sparked by the book itself, but I think it represents the very thing that you're suggesting, because it really is, it's such a unique explanation of the story that involved so many different groups in a genuinely DIY grassroots manner. So I'm not sure that totally answers your question, Ethan, but it is definitely a spark.
And yeah, I haven't heard of anything as of yet. I think how long has the book been out, Kiersten?
It came out, I think, in August of last year.
It was August? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so sometime, right? But as we keep doing our rounds and everybody and that is in the book and others continue to do their rounds, I'm sure that it will spark some individuals to do things with the text that we may not even have on our own individual horizon as it relates to how this particular book can impact people.
Yeah.
One thing that I've heard, sorry.
Go ahead, keep going.
I was just going to say one thing I've heard it talked about is in relation to what you're suggesting or what you're asking about is sometimes one teacher or one parent or one student will feel very alone in a school building, and like starting an activist-oriented action of some kind feels scary for a number of varying contexts. And so I think what the book suggests and demonstrates in a really illustrative way is that there are connections everywhere to be found as long as you're looking, and really illustrates that, I think, beautifully.
Yes, thank you. Odell reminds us, yeah, that's why we created the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Library. Yeah, exactly, Odell. I don't.
And I saw that there was a response up there by Craig. He said the sculptor did another one showing the rippings on her back. She has produced a powerful Sojourner Truth. I hope it will be judged on its artistic value. I think that judging things on the artistic value is important, but I think that also in terms of who we give these jobs and opportunities to, these thousands of dollars, these opportunities for individuals to further their work as it relates to the different ways in which Black folk continue to be marginalized in all of these spaces. I think that as we also seek to amplify Black voices in the work that we do, why not give Black people opportunities that they may not have otherwise, right? So, I mean, there's tension that's going on there, right? I'm just pushing back a little bit, right? Just a little bit, not strong, a little weak, but still pushing back a little bit, right? Understand the reality of those things, right? And when you give that job to somebody else, there's a Black person out there who can't feed their family, like, different things like that. So just understanding the full dynamics of that, right? That's all.
And I think to build on that, there's a difference between what the sculpture represents and then what actual action happens as a result of the dialogue around the sculpture. So similar to the name changes on our campus, where residential buildings that bore the names of slaveholders locally for years, the names of the buildings were just changed a couple of years ago. And it was a very long and drawn out process that ultimately did the right thing, and the conversation ended. So I think in a similar vein, like, we don't want to see the conversation, no matter the outcome of what happens with this statue, like, what's going to happen after? What is going to be the impact of it on our campus? That we can't know by looking at the artist's work. We don't, that's not enough.
Yes, Traylon adds, we need to uplift BIPOC folks. Absolutely. I'm also, like, you know, thinking about what both of you had said about, like, what it means for, in this case, a white woman to become, like, the person to do the Sojourner Truth sculpture all over the place, right? And, like, being acknowledged as, like, you're capable of doing this, but this is the only person we're going to pick. And then it kind of becomes like a monopoly of artistic production.
That's right.
And that can speak to what we actually talked about a little bit in our presentation, the ways in which whiteness becomes reproduced. White material development becomes reproduced by picking that person and not picking somebody else, particularly somebody else within that community that artistic piece is supposed to represent so much and have so much meaning for.
Right. Yeah. Like so now I'm thinking, but, like, in the moment we're like, okay, we have this statue in Port Ewan, but we also know that in the United States, statues are, it's a fight to take them down, right? So it's not only as if, like, we are creating, like, this creation will also last into the next 50 to 100 years, in which this white woman has documented Sojourner Truth in the physical form.
Teach.
So I'm just like, I'm really thinking of now, I'm like, yes, this is why we need to have this book. This is why y'all need to do this work, because then we get to have these conversations.
There you go. Good stuff.
Donna says, right, what better place to start than reaching into the amazing arts community in this area and finding the BIPOC artists? Exactly, love that.
Well, one question we have for participants is, what would you like to see more of? What would you like to see more from Suny? What would you like to see more in the community to disrupt everyday practices of white supremacy in our area? Not everyone all at once, but.
Remember what Martin Luther King said about silence, right?
Donna asks, are you being invited to the other schools to help them? Donna, do you mean high schools, middle schools, Suny, all of the United States? Is it local, national, or just in general? Local.
So we've spoken at another campus within the Suny system locally. I've done some professional development locally as well. And so has Anthony, and we will see what happens. We've gotten a number of invitations since the chapter, since the book came out, and I would say we are open to that. So if that leads to an invitation, Donna would be happy to have a conversation with you.
Susan asks, how do we get the police out of Kingston High School? Love that question.
How do we get them out of every high school? I think that there's a lot going on. I don't know if Anthony, you've been more involved in the conversations at the local community level than I have about defunding the police, but I know that there's been a lot of work that's happened in New Paltz around changing policies and practices, specifically about armed police in schools. So I don't know that there's no one surefire way to do that, but it's got to stop. I mean, the sheer numbers on how many schools there are with no counselors and tons of cops, it should be enough information. But I think certainly getting facts together is part of how we do that, raising awareness, putting together palm flyers, having protests. Certainly there's lots of information in the text that shares how some districts around the country have begun that process, but it's something we've got to do. We have to figure it out. There should not be police in schools.
And just to really just sum up what Kiersten just contributed, organize, organize, organize. Right. And also when we start talking about these organizations, understand that, you know, not everybody's going to be coming, be involved in organization the same way. And in addition to that, organizational dynamics, if you start to pay attention to it, generally they say out of most organizations, 10% of the people in the organization do the most work. It just is what it is, right? For whatever reason it might be, right? That are putting in that hard work. But organizing, because at the end of the day, like Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. Create the demand, bring organizations to bear on getting police out of school, because they are maintaining a police state in spaces that are supposed to be educational and about the development and growth of our youth towards a better future, right? Not towards a future that is monitored and established and structured around a police state.
Troy Allen says, SUNY New Paltz needs to fund anti-racism classes on an ongoing basis, actively seeking endowment funding to do so. Tran says, they had a committee of conservative Black people and they voted to put more money into police rather than decreasing funding.
Is that in New Paltz?
Locally. Yes, New Paltz. Wow.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Ann.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. But and it's important for us to understand that white people don't have a monopoly on conservatism. All right. And then even when you look at the full interest of Black folk are conservative on a variety of different things, right? Issues of sexuality, you know, right? The way in which, you know, certain policies are monetized. Black people are conservative in a variety of different spaces. And I mean, that doesn't surprise me. But yeah, you need to organize against that. And then Troy Allen had mentioned the fact that SUNY New Paltz needs to fund anti-racism classes on an ongoing basis. I think that is helpful, but what I'm trying to put more of my energy in is for them to mandate Black studies. A consequence of the mandating Black studies would mean that they would have to hire more Black faculty. In addition to that, you use Black studies as the fundamental component to bring about a sense of equity and teach all of these classes on anti-racism by exposing them to Black voices, amplifying Black voices, and trying to undermine this toxic anti-Black environment that persists within this institution and just also nationwide, right? So I think a way of doing that again is mandating Black studies, just like some cities such as, I believe, I was gonna say Camden, but not Camden, but I know Philadelphia mandated Black history for all of its students, K through 12. Temple University some years ago mandated courses in race, a little bit different for mandating Black studies, but then that mandate in courses in race, after about 8 years of being there, they changed it to mandating courses in diversity, right? This is not the same thing. You understand how certain things can get watered down, right? So even for instance, and I'm going to push back on some stuff I heard earlier, I'm sorry, don't hurt me. In terms of us it's important for us to embrace the BIPOC communities, but it is also important for us, because this is Black Lives Matter at school, for us to emphasize the significance of Black people getting material wealth distributed into their communities in an intentional way. All right. at the end of the day, I'm saying you need to be open for compromise about that, but I am unapologetic about that stance in a variety of different ways, for a variety of different reasons. My people dying. They dying. Just like as we read about this George Floyd and stuff like that. Y'all see what's going on TV? I have elders who are very much committed to this stuff, watch it every day, that are literally within the last 24 to 48 hours sick and saying, literally got sick. I can't watch it anymore right now. It's just too much all at once. It's just too much. And I get it. All right. And we exist in a radical situation. And at the end of the day, radical situations require radical solutions. Mandate Black studies. That's what
I meant. This might be, okay, we're getting questions. All right, Pam says, I was recently in a training of staff that featured a slide of the Blue Lives Matter symbol. And I wish I had a very succinct statement at hand to explain how it supports white supremacy. Could you perhaps recommend where I can find a really brief and powerful explanation of that from my back pocket? And then,
yes. So last summer or last spring, when I was actually walking up to the University Police Department kiosk for keys for another event that I was participating in. And that's when I saw the sticker. And we, took a deep dive into Blue Lives Matter history pretty much that day, because I found myself engaged in discussions and getting lots of pushback from my colleagues, especially about, we can't really talk about Black Lives Matter because we have so many Blue Lives Matter parents in the district, like these bizarre conversations defending Blue Lives Matter. So I created this Adobe Spark that it can't fit in your back pocket, but it really goes through the history of how Blue Lives Matter evolved and how it's like it's like not even a thing. Like it was created in direct opposition to Black Lives Matter. And the symbolism going back to wars many hundreds of years earlier is a thing, but it was created as some sort of mythical, sorry, I'm going off. Yes, there is a thing that explains it, and it's at that link.
Susan asks, would the BLMS collective be interested in participating in a June 2nd Remembrance Walk in Port Jervis to educate the community about the lynching of Robert Lewis in 1892?
I feel as though that we can definitely share it with the collective. That being said, so an issue that is going on that has prevented me from just even participating in marches and stuff like that. At the end of the day, my queen not letting me get out and march right now. I'm sorry, it's not happening. All right, y'all understand how my mom is sick right now. When I travel to Philly, all right, when I come back to New York, I got to get a COVID test before I walk in the door. So because we both had COVID last March, remember when New York hit, and we are just taking it seriously. Yeah, we got our first injections actually this weekend. But going forward in terms of marching and stuff like that, as it relates to me, I'm hesitant to move forward with those things, looking to be, participate fully in the way that I have in the past. But the collective itself, we could definitely pass that on to the collective, and you will find individuals that are willing to participate. Let's put it out there.
And then Kiersten's put the BLMS collective at newpaltz.edu email for anyone who would like to reach out. So we're just about,
right there it is.
We're just about at 7:30. I have one more question before we do closing remarks. Where do you suggest that we buy the book from in order to make sure the co-writers get the most academic acknowledgement, right? Because I know tenure is a thing, but also that you do get money. If you get money, I don't know.
No, we don't. But that's okay. But Haymarket is the publisher. They're an independent, activist-oriented, progressive publisher. Definitely support that organization. So I put the link in the chat, and it is a very reasonably priced book.
Okay, thank you for that. And we will also post that link on the African Roots Center Facebook page. Lastly, do y'all have any closing remarks?
no really closing remarks outside of the fact I am honored to be able to participate in this particular discussion today as it relates to us engaging our work, but also participating here with like-minded individuals. And I do see myself moving forward to reducing that distance that I have between the center and also bringing students with me as well. Because Dr. A.J. Williams-Myers was a faculty member at the university, and I need to just help to reinforce students understanding the importance of us carrying on individuals' legacies and honoring the work that they have as we move forward.
And thank you for making this time, for inviting us to be here together with you tonight, and making space for us to be able to share this important story. I'm here as a resource if I can be helpful in any way, truly.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Kiersten. Thank you, Anthony, for this, this brilliant evening. I think we're all feeling a little bit more hopeful, a little bit more excited and resilient. Also, thank you to all the guests that came out tonight, and have a good evening.